Welcome to MTI Webinars, the online learning channel of MedTech Intelligence. Today's program is Are You Talking to Me? Communicating effectively with your notified body for an accountable and sustainable working relationship. The program today is presented and sponsored by SGS. SGS is a leading testing, inspection, and certification company operating a network of over 2,500 laboratories and business facilities across 119 countries and supported by more than 99,000 dedicated professionals. With over 145 years of service excellence, SGS combines the precision and accuracy that define Swiss companies to help organizations achieve the highest standards of quality, safety, and compliance. Presenting today is Dr. Ibam Taria. Ibam holds a PhD in Polymer Science and Materials Technology and currently serves as Technical Business Development Director for Medical Devices at SGS. Dr. Taria's European regulatory affairs experience includes more than 25 years of combination device knowledge incorporating biologics, drugs, and drug biologics together, as well as quality management systems assessment of medical devices. His expertise lies in innovative, non-active vascular, orthopedic and dental, and other long-term implantable devices. Ibam, welcome.
Thank you. Next slide, please. So, SGS has been established for over 145 years and has about 100,000 employees worldwide with about 2,500 offices and laboratories covering 11 global industries. Next slide, please. We do have a global network that covers quality of service, industry expertise, digital innovation, and corporate sustainability. Indeed, anything that man makes, SGS almost always touches it. Next slide, please. Yeah. Within our business stream, which is business assurance, we do cover assessments, auditing, and certification, supply chain assurance, consulting services, training, sustainability assurance, and of course, medical devices regulatory compliance. Next slide, please. I'm going to skip this one because Rich had already provided you with my background. Next slide, please. So for today's webinar, the agenda is as follows. We're going to talk about regulatory basis of effective communication, structured dialogue as described in MDCG 2022-14, and Team NB Code of Conduct document. We'll then switch gears and consider communication during the three main phases of EU conformity assessments, which are application review, quality management system audit, product review. We'll then draw some conclusions and take questions and answers. Next slide, please. So, first things first, let's consider the definition of communication, because everything we're going to talk about today will be in the context of this definition. It is a process by which information is exchanged between individuals through a common system of symbols, signs, or behavior. Keep this in mind. Information is exchanged between individuals, maybe organizations, through common system, symbols, signs, or behavior. Information is communicated, maybe transmitted, or conveyed. It also involves a system example of telephones or computers, for transmitting or exchanging information, and in this day and age will include something like SharePoint sites. So keep this definition in mind because the rest of the discussions will be in the context of these elements. Next slide, please. So from the MDR Annex VII Section 1.2.9 provides the requirements, and it reads as follows. The independence and impartiality requirements laid down in Section 1.2 in no way preclude exchanges of technical information and regulatory guidance between a notified body and a manufacturer applying for conformity assessments. In other words, the regulation does expect manufacturer and notified body to be communicating with each other periodically on a regular basis on matters that are of mutual interest. Next slide, please. From MDCG 2022-14, element number 15 reads as follows. The MDCG encourages notified bodies and manufacturers to organize structured dialogues before and during the conformity assessment process aimed at regulatory procedures where this is useful to enhance the efficiency and predictability of the conformity assessment process, while respecting the independence and impartiality of the notified body. Such dialogue should not be considered consultancy service. There you have it. They expect structured dialogue before and during. And it's now pretty clear that such dialogues must not be considered as consultancy service. I say this because earlier, at the inception of the MDR, some notified bodies were shy to engage with notified bodies for fear of being misconstrued as engaging in consultancy. I think this document makes it absolutely clear. Next slide, please. And then from the Notified Body Trade Association Team NB Code of Conduct version number 5 that was published in September 2024, notified bodies have also, based on the text of the regulation and the MDCG guidance document, have come up with guidelines on how notified bodies should communicate with manufacturers. Next slide, please. So in essence, it's a balancing act. If you look to the right-hand side, if there were no communication, this could inadvertently lead to excessively burdensome conformity assessments, whereby applications may be doomed to fail because both sides are not talking to each other. I'm talking about notified body and manufacturer. QMS audits may end up with major non-conformities, again because of a lack of communication. And then product assessor's findings may become unclear to the manufacturer if no clarification is provided by the notified body. On the left-hand side, if there was full-blown communication whereby the notified body was telling the manufacturer everything, that will be tantamount to consultation, which is not acceptable. However, we're talking about effective communication as described by the structural dialogue process I earlier mentioned. But we've got to be careful that whilst a notified body is engaged with the manufacturer, there's no threat to impartiality. Next slide, please. So notified bodies can discuss, and this list is not exhaustive, project plans, submission requirements, notification of change by a manufacturer, the use of common specifications, EU harmonized standards, international standards, and guidance documents. Of course, notified bodies can also provide estimates, quotes, and project timelines to manufacturers. Next slide, please. However, notified bodies cannot, and again the list here is not exhaustive, complete gap analysis for manufacturers, check for readiness against any of the regulations, i.e. pre-audit, conduct mock files against any regulation conformity, undertake clinical strategy review for manufacturers, provide technical solutions to manufacturers, or indeed explain how the manufacturer should meet specific regulatory requirements. Next slide, please. In this section, we'll take a deeper dive at the communication during the main phases of conformity assessment process, which are application review, which involves manufacturer notified body interaction. Keep in mind, it is the manufacturer that does their due diligence and decides on a notified body they choose to work with. You then engage that notified body and make a formal application. That notified body then has to review the application. The other phase will be conducting quality management system audit. Again, that's a manufacturer notified body interaction. And the next phase is product review. Again, involves manufacturer notified body interaction. The output of the QMS audit and the product review are then taken into account into making a certification decision, which almost always is an internal notified body process. Typically, manufacturers are not involved. However, there may be an odd occasion where a clarification is being sought, in which case input from the manufacturer may be required. But typically, almost always, the certification decision is an internal notified body process. Next slide, please. So, application review requirements comes from MDR Annex VII Clause 4.2d. And it says it there, the review of pre-application information, including the preliminary verification that the product is covered by this regulation and its classification, prior to issuing any quotation to the manufacturer relating to a specific conformity assessment. So it is an obligation for the manufacturer to review that application information before issuing a quotation or planning any conformity assessment. It's mandatory. Next slide, please. So let's consider in this next section pitfalls during the application review. Typically, lack of application completeness with respect to the requirements of the relevant conformity assessment procedure, lack of verification of the qualification of products covered by the applications as devices and their respective classifications, lack of understanding of classification terms and definitions, example, invasiveness, use duration, active devices, clinical setting, surgical setting. The conformity assessment procedures chosen by the applicant not applicable to the device in question under this regulation. For instance, somebody opting for, say, conformity assessment via Annex 11 Part A, which may not necessarily be applicable to a Class 3 device that includes design. Next slide, please. Yeah, further pitfalls product structure, especially accessories not properly identified, standalone accessories crammed in with main device, making it difficult for the product reviewer to come up with a workable review strategy. Product identity not fully explained, for instance, variants and models being omitted, basic UDI versus UDI not being consistent, unsatisfactory product readiness, example, significant gaps in clinical evaluation report, the technical documentation itself, and supply chains not clearly identified, particularly in situations where the manufacturer may be virtual, in which case they delegate tasks to third parties. Missing key information such as manufacturing flowchart, interfaces with suppliers, including critical subcontractors and all crucial suppliers. Next slide, please. So, the requirements for communicating during the QMS is laid out in MDR Article 9, Clause 9, Article 10, Clause 9. It reads as follows: the quality management system shall cover all parts and elements of a manufacturer's organization dealing with the quality of processes, procedures, and devices. Right there, you are covering every aspect of the device, from inception to qualifications. So we're talking about the materials you source, the design, all the iterations of the design, design freeze, prototyping, testing, validation, verification, and of course product launch. And he said it shall be governed. It shall govern the structure, responsibilities, procedures, processes, and management resources required in implementing the principles and actions necessary to achieve compliance with the provisions of this regulation. Next slide, please. One additional requirement under Article 10, Clause 9 is subclause J, which is new, and reads as follows: handling communication with competent authorities, notified bodies, other economic operators, customers, and all stakeholders. So right there, it is mandatory to have to handle communication with your notified body. Next slide, please. So zooming in on the QMS audit itself, I'm not going to dwell too much time on this because this is a fairly standard process that is well understood. Essentially, a manufacturer receives an audit date from a notified body. The notified body and manufacturer agree these audit dates. Nearer the time, the manufacturer receives an audit plan from the notified body. The notified body shows up and conducts the audit in a cooperative manner. By this I mean, there's no war room. Notified body auditor requests for information. Manufacturer provides information. Keep in mind, the auditor is not here to catch anybody out. The auditor is there simply to audit your processes, to confirm that indeed your processes are in compliance with the regulation. And the regulation is the law of the land. So it's in your interest to play ball with the auditor, be cooperative. If there are things that you believe have not been carefully explained, you must share that with the auditor. So the auditor or the notified body has to now, after the audit, prepare the audit report in a timely manner. Thereafter, typically with most audits, there will be corrective and prevention action plans. This must be provided to the notified body, again in a timely manner. There's no point conducting an audit in January and then it takes several months before the manufacturer provides their corrective action plan to the notified body. Again, the notified body, upon receipt of that CAPA plan, should close out all non-conformities in a timely manner. And if there are any clarifications that need to be sorted whilst all these activities are happening, surely manufacturer should engage within a notified body and clear up those issues such that the notified body should, in a timely manner, close out the QMS phase of the conformity assessment. Next slide, please. The requirements of technical documentations are in several places of the regulation, and I'll quickly go through them. The first one will be under Article 10, Clause 4, which obliges the manufacturer to draw up and keep up to date a technical documentation for their devices. Then in Annex 2, Paragraph 1, it states the technical documentation and, if applicable, the summary thereof, to be drawn up by the manufacturer shall be presented in a clear, organized, readily searchable, and unambiguous manner. You then go into Annex 2, Sections 1 to 6. All the key elements that must be addressed in a technical documentation are there. And then in Annex 3, the requirements of the technical documentation required for the post-market phase are also listed. Then in Annex 7, Section 4.5.1 states that the notified body shall, not will, shall review these technical documentations. Next slide, please. Now, in the EU, there's no prescription of what must be in a technical documentation. So Team NB, the Trade Association of Notified Bodies, have put together a position paper which serves as a best practice guide. So I will definitely encourage manufacturers to take a look at this document whilst preparing their technical documentation. Next slide, please. So regarding technical documentation, I think there are some ground rules that are helpful in preparing a good technical documentation. First, we'll look at the operating principles. 1. Assume that the product assessor has no prior knowledge of your device or submission history, your technical documentation of your company. As such, avoid acronyms. Keep in mind, the product assessor is not part of your organization. However, by virtue of their education, their industry experience, their understanding of the regulations, they will be able to review your information and make a decision. Use pictures, illustrations, diagrams, and drawings to assist understanding. Treat each submission in isolation. Don't mix things up. It makes it very difficult to follow threads. Strive for consistency and clarity and avoid confusion and ambiguity. Only submit documentation that is relevant and keep the technical documentation concise. Do anything you can to assist with navigation of the file. In this regard, it may be helpful even before the project starts to have a 30-minute meeting with the Product Assessor to show them, introduce the structure of your file before they actually get going. It will pay dividends down the line, I promise you. Make conclusions. Don't expect the product reviewer to make conclusions for you. At the end of the day, you, the manufacturer, is the one that has put together all this information and claiming compliance with the regulation. Therefore, the onus is on you to make conclusions. These must be based on provided objective evidence. Legal manufacturer must take responsibility for supplier documentation. In situations where you've delegated third parties to conduct key tasks for you, again, the onus falls on you to control whatever documentation they have put together on behalf of your organization for the tasks they are conducting on your behalf. Use common language aligned with the MDR, harmonized standards, and guidance documents. That way, no one inadvertently makes any misinterpretations. Ensure all statements of fact reference supportive documentation and avoid using more than one trade name. That leads to a lot of confusion. Next slide, please. So some practical requirements. Technical documentation should always be submitted to a notified body, preferably in electronic format. For the simple reason that these days we're dealing with huge amounts of information. Sometimes these things run into thousands of pages. The technical documentation should be comprised of files that are not too large, maybe 100 megabytes limit. The file addresses should be no longer than 256 characters, possibly. Be structured in a logical system of folders with file paths, ideally less than 3 subfolders. Have file names that reflect the content so that it is self-explanatory. And as I've heard before, be searchable and be in text-readable format, not locked. Be indexed and or bookmarked with section number, headers, and content pages. Be written in or translated into the notified body business language. Be signed and dated, especially for key documentation. And also be subjected to the usual document control in the quality management system. Next slide, please. As it relates to content and structure, I think it is incumbent that the manufacturer communicates very clearly critical information. In that regard, I'll urge every manufacturer to tell their story. Keep in mind, you live and breathe these devices. You design them. You develop them. You did the prototyping. You did all the testing, including any clinical trials as applicable. You reached that conclusion that said, yes, it's a go. We got to move forward and launch the device. So nobody on earth knows about this device any more than you, the manufacturer. As such, please provide an executive summary explaining the purpose of the submission. Use a summary technical documentation format if necessary. Include supportive documentation in separate folders. Describe how the device is placed on the market, what is included in the packaging. Describe device variants, accessories, and compatible devices related to the device in question. Use product codes and basic UDI to avoid confusion. Describe market history, including when key certification was achieved. Include sale figures per year, per territory for maybe about 5 years with accompanying complaints and vigilance data. In other words, paint a picture about your device. That way, it gives the reviewer a very good overview even before they start, and hopefully will lead that reviewer to come up with the most appropriate review strategy. Define the route to clinical compliance and summarize what clinical evidence is being presented in support according to MDR Article 61. Next slide, please. So there are typically complicating factors, and we're going to consider 5 such factors, starting with submission strategy. In this example, I've looked at 2 scenarios. Of course, there's always more than one way to skin a cat. So in this case, we'll look at sequential submissions versus concurrent submissions. Well, it may appear from this diagram that sequential submissions take longer, and that to reduce lead time, maybe you should opt for that concurrent option. However, when there's a steeper gradient, as illustrated with the concurrent option, there's an increasing chance of significant risk or even delay, and I would explain. You see, with the sequential approach, there's always a learning process by both parties, notified body and the manufacturer, such that by the second or third submission, both parties are becoming more acquainted to either the structure of the files and the information contained therein from a notified body perspective, and from a manufacturer's perspective, you're becoming more familiar with the type of questions and the areas the notified body reviewer or reviewers are honing in on. Those experiences can then be put to bear in subsequent submissions, so that subsequent submissions will go much faster, hopefully with much fewer questions. However, in the concurrent approach, because some of those reviews are already stacked upon each other, you may not have had adequate time to apply any lessons learned to subsequent or latter submissions. So these are the 2 options. Of course, there's a hybrid option that readily springs to mind. Maybe start with a sequential approach and switch to concurrent thereafter. Sorry. But it's up to the manufacturer to go with whichever strategy they believe works best for their product portfolio. Next slide, please. Readiness of your technical documentation. It stands to reason that the better ready you are, the greater your chance of success. In contrast, if you are not ready, then your chance of failure is much higher. Keep in mind, it is not speed to submission. It's time to market. And time to market means putting together a compliant technical documentation for the notified body to do their conformity assessment in the most efficient manner, such that your certificate is issued in a timely manner, as opposed to sending in a technical documentation that is not clear, that is not searchable, that is ambiguous. That leads to a lot of frustration on the reviewer's part and would typically translate into a much longer review time and costly expenses to the manufacturer. Next slide, please. Another complicating factor is unclear definition of the device or scope of review. So is it a kit, pack, or set? So in other words, which conformity assessment route is more appropriate, Article 22 or Article 52? It's you, the manufacturer, that has to let us know what you want to do. How many basic UDIs are there? Is the device or are the devices wet? Well-established technologies. Are they components? Are they devices? Or are these accessories? Or indeed various configurations? And if it's wet, what about Article 61, Clause 10? Does that apply to these bits of devices you provided? You've got to communicate clearly to the notified body exactly what it is you are proposing to do. Next slide, please. Multiple devices in the same technical file. I think it is so true that if you try to use one basic UDI to cover multiple technical documentations, that is generally not acceptable. However, it may be possible to use one technical documentation to cover several basic UDIs. But you run the risk of inconsistencies and increased complexity. Best practice is to use one technical documentation for one basic UDI. When you begin to have more than one basic UDI in one technical documentation, it could lead to a lot of confusion and makes audit trail very difficult. You got to think it through. So are all devices in the file part of the same range? How are devices grouped? Is there more than one basic UDI? How many IFUs have you included? Do all devices have the same intended use? Is it clear which device range is being reviewed, and is the data for that device clearly extractable? Consider this. If you were to have several devices in one technical documentation, how are you going to be separating out risk management information relating to each one of those devices, including information obtained from the post-market phase? I think it's going to be nigh impossible. You soon find out. So it makes sense to use one technical documentation for one basic UDI. Next slide, please. Another complicating factor is undeclared changes. So you came up with a model 1, and over time, maybe as technology changes or feedback from the post-market phase, you decide to come up with a version 2. Things that need to be considered and communicated would be, have data from the latest revision been presented? If not, how is data from the previous iteration be justified in the current model? You've got to tell a story. Notified bodies cannot presume. We can only go off information which is part of the communication process that is presented to a notified body. Next slide, please. So how will the Product Assessor typically review your submission? They will review your technical documentation in full against the requirements of the regulation and document it in a report. They review files in a timely manner according to the planned schedule that has been shared with you wherever possible, unless, of course, there was a reason to stop the clock, in which case you should be informed accordingly. They will raise non-conformities where gaps are identified, and they will also offer to clarify points raised where needed, typically via emails so that it's all documented, or in a brief call. If it is the latter, please prepare a summary of queries in advance of the meeting. Keep in mind, your notified body does not just work with you. They work with several other manufacturers, and it's fair that they are able to prioritize whatever it is they're doing with you to make sure they can also serve other clients. Next slide, please. So after submission, responding to non-conformities. Next slide, please. So what do you do when you receive that report? It is advisable to read it carefully, paying particular attention to the conclusions and the non-conformities at the end of each section. You, the manufacturer, should provide unambiguous responses to the non-conformities at the end of each report section, if applicable, making clear reference to the supportive evidence. Make every effort to close as many non-conformities at the end of each section as possible at each review round to avoid accumulation of non-conformities in latter review rounds. Remember, most notified bodies have finite number of reviews, and you don't want your review to time out, in which case you have to restart the whole process. Apply lessons learned from previous review findings to subsequent technical documentation submissions. Next slide, please. In conclusions, the MDR clearly requires communication between manufacturer and notified body. Manufacturers are encouraged to open lines of communications. It should be a two-way street. Consider your notified body a strategic service provider, a key source of regulatory information. Look at it this way. You may have developed the best thing since sliced bread, but without that notified body certification, that device may never see the light of day in Europe. Nurture a professional relationship with your notified body contact. Periodic meetings is one way of doing that. And even when things go south, be professional. Come up with a win-win strategy. That way you should always have your notified body contacts on your side. Also keep in mind, notified bodies are not there to stop your device getting onto the marketplace. To the contrary, but that is a small matter of you, the manufacturer, providing information to your notified body that demonstrates compliance. Because at the end of it all, the notified body is a co-regulator that is ultimately answerable to the competent authority, whose primary role is to protect public health. Next slide, please. So yes, at SGS, we do have a training academy. We do have about 20,000 courses. There's a link there where you can familiarize yourself, and if you wish to explore or decide on any training, please reach out to your SGS contact. Next slide, please. And yes, you can subscribe or check out things that SGS are up to on our YouTube channel. Next slide, please. Thank you for your time listening to this webinar. I'll be quite happy to take on any questions at this point.
Thanks, Ibum. Great overview of best practices for communicating with your notified body. We do have a few questions here from the audience, so I'll start and just jump in very quickly. So it says here, how should a manufacturer communicate with a notified body when the reviewer comes back with a question that says some part of the MDR isn't met, but doesn't specify how it's deficient?
The best way to do that will be to respond to the notified body auditor or product assessor and ask them to be more explicit. For instance, if you raise a non-conformity, it should be raised against a particular section of the regulation. You cannot just make general comments, otherwise it's now impossible to satisfactorily address the non-conformity that has been raised. It's got to be explicit.
So I guess that's for application review. How many rounds back and forth does it typically take with your notified body?
It varies. Now, again, a lot depends on prior experience of that manufacturer working with notified bodies. For instance, for medium-sized organizations to very large organizations that have large regulatory departments, you're probably talking about 2 rounds, 3 rounds typically. The third round will be just crossing I's and dotting I's and crossing T's. However, for small to medium-sized manufacturers who are not very familiar with the requirements, it does take several rounds. And typically it's trying to identify what the device is, the accessories. If the accessories are also sold as separate catalog item numbers, making sure the right device codes has been assigned, classifications, etc., etc. So some of these steps lead to several rounds of that application review.
So similarly, in technical documentation review, do you have recommendations of how to do things differently to reduce the number of non-conformities raised by a notified body?
Yes. So, as I indicated before, remember the reviewer is not part of your organization. So it's incumbent on the manufacturer to tell their story. There's nothing wrong in having a 15-minute chat with your product assessor prior to commencement of that review. First of all, introduce the structure of your file to your reviewer. Introduce your technology. Point out to them if there are any nuances they need to take on board, because this will help them come up with a strategy for conducting that review. When you provide information per the requirements in Annex 2, make sure it's clear. Don't assume anything. Make sure the information is searchable. Make sure it's unambiguous. I'll give you an instance. There are 23 GSPRs, General Safety and Performance Requirements. Some of them, take GSPR 11, goes into several subsections. Some manufacturers would choose to just provide a general answer or response to GSPR 11. That is a no-no. There's a reason why there are subsections to those GSPRs. You've got to address each subsection that is applicable to your device in turn. In other words, be very clear, be precise. There should be no ambiguity, such that anybody reading your information would understand exactly what you're talking about. And also keep in mind, as I indicated in my main presentation, notified bodies are co-regulators. They are also in turn audited by the competent authorities. So you've got to make sure that you are able to address a diverse audience, not just your notified body reviewer, but also somebody from the competent authority or someone from the EU who decides they want to check into your file. So the point here is you've got to make sure you provide clear information that will make sense and convey the fact that you've demonstrated compliance with the appropriate section of the regulation.
Great. Well, it's coming up to the top of the hour, so I think that we'll go ahead and thank Eben for a great overview and guidance and best practices discussion communicating with your notified body. And thanks again to SGS for sponsoring today's webinar. We'd also like to thank everyone who participated today. Thanks for joining us. Please let us know how we did today by filling out our program evaluation. You'll receive an email with a link to that online evaluation shortly, as well as a link to the on-demand video recording for review at any time. And if you would like to receive a copy of the presentation, you just need to email me or Ebam, and we can send that on to you. So we thank you for your time. Thanks again to SGS and to Ebam, and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you, Rich. Appreciate it.